my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm going to cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is in partnership with Needed. The prenatal vitamin industry is failing us, leaving 95% of us depleted during one of the most nutritionally demanding times in our life. There's overwhelming evidence that higher standards of nutrition will improve fertility, birth outcomes, and the trajectory of life. Despite this, most prenatal vitamins only provide bare minimum nutrition. Needed goes way beyond bare minimums with products that can fully meet the needs of our minds, bodies, and babies. Needed's radically better nutritional system is third-party tested and rigorously developed with the endorsement of over 6,000 women's health experts. In addition to their prenatal multivitamins and pre- and probiotics, I am obsessed with their cognitive support supplement, which helps with brain fog, which I know is such a struggle when you're postpartum. At this point, I've talked to so many Birth Hour listeners who have discovered Needed through the podcast, and I love hearing the feedback that they're feeling better during pregnancy since starting with Needed's prenatal vitamins. Needed has all your needs covered from preconception to postpartum and beyond. Needed also simplifies things by bundling core products into easy and flexible monthly plans. You can use the code BIRTHHOUR for 20% off your first order and up to 40% off monthly plans at thisisneeded.com. Since this discount applies to your first order only, I always recommend going with one of the plans for the best value. At the end of this episode, I talked to Ryan, co-founder of Needed, about their recent IRB study results and what makes their products really stand out. So stay tuned for that conversation at the end of this episode. Before we get to today's birth story, I want to talk a little bit about our online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options, and this is the course you've been looking for if you just have that gut feeling that you know you should be taking a childbirth course, but maybe the one that's being offered to you by your care provider is not exactly what you're looking for. It might be more catered towards the type of birth they want you to have versus making you informed of all your different options and how to address different things that happen in birth, because as this podcast has shown us, birth is very unpredictable. So we would love to have you check out our 12-module course. You can go to thebirthhour.com/course to see detailed outlines of what is included in the course. You will also get a bonus course called Beyond the First Latch that is an additional 6 modules all about pumping, feeding your baby, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan. And we have a special coupon code for you. It's 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. Another great way to be part of the Birth Hour community is by supporting us over on Patreon. So by pledging your support each month at the $5 a month level, you can get access to all of our archived episodes, so over 800 additional episodes not in the main podcast feed, as well as our private Facebook group that has such a great backlog of information. Just using that search bar, you can get almost any question answered, and you're going to find really supportive people there that are going to become your friends. And in addition to that, we do monthly Zoom calls. Just go over to patreon.com/Birth Hour and become a Patreon member and come see what it's all about. It's just $5 a month. You can get an even bigger discount. If you want to do an annual membership, you'll see that option there. And there's also an option to get it as a gift. So if you have a friend or a mother-in-law or somebody asking you what they can get you to help you prepare for baby, maybe you want a Birth Hour Patreon membership so that you can listen to more and more birth stories and find great community. So again, head over to patreon.com/Birth Hour to get started with that. Today's birth story guest is Rebecca, and she has what she describes as a textbook labor and birth, but then she had a hemorrhage postpartum, so she talks about both of those experiences. All right, let's hear from Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, we have one birth story to get to today, but before we do that, will you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Absolutely. So my name is Rebecca Eppall. I live in Massachusetts, just outside Boston, with my husband, Steve, and our daughter, Emery, and our cat, Oliver. And we are expecting our second child in July.
Congratulations. That's very exciting.
Thank you.
I feel like it's fun to record your birth story when you're pregnant again because you're reflecting a lot.
Yeah, get to relive the first experience and think about what I want to be the same or different this time around.
Yep. All right. Well, let's go ahead and go back to finding out you were pregnant, how your pregnancy went.
Great. So my husband and I got married in June 2021, sort of still pandemic-ish. And I went off the pill, which I had been taking for about a decade, I think the same day as our wedding. We knew we wanted to have kids pretty quickly. And I was taking ovulation tests. We had a sort of tight timeline with some family events that we knew we needed. Like if we were going to get pregnant quickly, we needed to kind of move that along, or else we would have to wait for a little bit to not run into these family events. So I was taking ovulation tests every day for multiple weeks because I didn't know anything about what my cycle would be like and didn't know how to read the ovulation tests. And I wasn't sure if they were really positive. And then eventually I had about a month and a half later, I had a very positive ovulation test. And I was like, oh, I didn't think that this was when I would be ovulating. And I was looking online and I realized some people said that a positive ovulation test could be an indicator of pregnancy. And I was like, let me just take a test just to be sure. And I took the pregnancy test and it was indeed positive. So we were surprised and excited, but got very lucky with how quickly we got pregnant.
Yeah, it's always like you feel like it's not going to be as easy as it is. And then when it is, it's such a surprise. And I feel like it can take a little bit longer to sink in when it happens quickly.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't think this is real. I remember I made my husband go with me to the Target. I only had one pregnancy test. And I was like, we have to go get another one and make sure. So we ran to Target, got like 3 more tests. They were all positive.
Yeah, I feel like those things are never going to struggle for business because one is never enough. And they're silly expensive. So, but worth it when you really just need to confirm. All right. So yeah, let's talk about how your pregnancy went and like planning for care providers and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I had a fairly typical healthy pregnancy. I had some significant nausea in the first trimester. One note that I did want to make is that when I was pregnant the first time, I took B6 and Unisom to help with the nausea, and it definitely helped, but the Unisom knocked me out, and I would take it at 7:00 at night so that I would be like functional the next morning, and I'd be in bed at 7:30, just like totally incapable of doing anything. And nobody told me, and I wish that I knew then what I now know, which is that the Diclegis, the prescription version of the same thing, for me at least, works better for the nausea and doesn't knock me out the same. So second pregnancy, it's been much better. And anyone who's wondering if they should take the prescription version, do it. So just, public health advisory.
That's awesome that it's going easier for you this time.
Yeah. Thank goodness, because, pregnancy with a toddler is its own challenge. But
yes.
But yeah, so my first pregnancy, we fairly early on, I knew that I wanted to hire a doula. And so we kind of looked around a little bit and had an introductory conversation with one doula. I had already had my first appointment with a provider at a place local to me that delivered about 10 minutes from our house, and talked to this doula and was like, we're thinking about this place that we want to deliver. And here's what I'm thinking. I'd like to have a low intervention birth. And if possible, I'd like to avoid an epidural, and kind of told her what we were hoping for. And she was like, okay, would you like my opinion on the different places that you could deliver around here? And I was like, yes, please. I'd love that. And she actually recommended that if we wanted a low intervention birth, that we switch to a different hospital to deliver at. Which is about 20 minutes away from our house. So we decided to do that and move forward. The initial provider I was seeing, that I'd only seen for one appointment, didn't deliver at that hospital. So I switched my care to a team of midwives, which I think was a great decision. I ended up feeling like I got really, really good care.
Yeah, doulas really have the best recommendations, which I know sometimes you feel like you're finding your doula too early, but they can be so helpful early in pregnancy as well with that kind of thing.
They totally can. Yeah, I wouldn't have known to switch providers if it weren't for her. So
right, yeah, and they've been in the room many times. I mean, I know doulas who won't even work for people who are delivering at certain hospitals because it's not a good environment for them to be in.
Yeah, so definitely feel grateful for her advice and that we took it. Yeah, so most of pregnancy was kind of pretty straightforward. We used the Know Your Options birth course, which was really helpful.
Oh, good.
I spent a lot of time listening to the birth hour. A couple of other things that I found really helpful. during pregnancy, I read the Birth Partner book, which I bought for my partner, but ended up finding it helpful for myself also.
Yeah.
And I also really appreciated Expecting Better by Emily Oster, which just goes into all of the details about like the different pregnancy recommendations and how much data there is or isn't to back them up, and how does it matter if you eat a hot dog.
Yeah. And like a lot of it is just based on like passed down information that doesn't have any evidence to back it up. It's kind of crazy.
Right. So that definitely made me feel better about a lot of the decisions that we were making, in like my decisions about what food I was going to eat and things like that. Yeah. So like, nausea eased at the end of the first trimester. I did start experiencing some pretty significant SPD pain and pelvic pain, probably around 20 weeks, and was able to see a pelvic floor PT, which I wanted to do anyway. And this was kind of like a way that somebody would prescribe it for me. So kind of convenient in some ways. But that was really helpful both for the pelvic floor pain. They gave me some exercises. They also like did some soft tissue, basically massage on a weekly basis, which was lovely. And they prescribed they told me a particular band. It's called a Sorolla band that went around my hips to help with the keep the pelvis in the right place. So that was really helpful. And then they also did some birth prep and like perineal massage towards the end of the pregnancy, which was great. The other thing that I tried to keep up with throughout my pregnancy was exercise. And there's an app, and there's two sisters. One is a doula and one is a pelvic floor PT. And they have an app called Expecting and Empowered that provides workouts for people all throughout their pregnancy. And it is based on whatever week in pregnancy you are. So that was a great way for me to kind of keep myself motivated and prepare for labor and delivery and parenting, and keep myself moving throughout the pregnancy. And then, third trimester sleep gets a little bit harder. And a friend had recommended an audiobook called Mindful Hypnobirthing by Sophie Fletcher, which I really liked the audiobook because I just listened to it at night while I was falling asleep, and I would just set a timer on it. So it both was good birth preparation, but also helped me sleep in the last weeks of pregnancy as well. Other than that, it was a pretty kind of standard pregnancy, no particular concerns.
Okay. Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and talk about how labor started for you.
So I was due April 18th. So I had my, got towards the end of pregnancy, I had my weekly appointments with the midwife. And Friday, April 8th, so like about 2 weeks before my due date, I was 1 to 2 centimeters dilated and 50% effaced and a +1 station. And so the midwife did a membrane sweep. I asked her to, and she was like, I will be surprised if you are still pregnant when we have our appointment next week. And I was like, okay, I'm ready. Like, I'm ready to go here. The following week, April 15th, I was still pregnant, went to my appointment. I was still 1 to 2 centimeters dilated, 80% effaced. And so I had the midwife do another membrane sweep. And she again was like, I will be surprised if you are still pregnant by the end of the weekend. Like, tonight's the night. And I was like, all right, I'm ready. I'm here. I'm going to like go to sleep early. I'm going to get all the rest. And I was scheduled to go on leave that Monday on my due date. And I'd been approved for the Massachusetts leave starting that Monday. So even if the baby didn't arrive, I was just going to stop working on my due date.
Okay.
So on Sunday, I started losing my mucus plug, and I was like, okay, the midwife said we were ready to go. She'd already been incorrect about both of her predictions, which, I know there is no crystal ball with birth, but I was surprised that she actually made predictions.
Yeah. I don't know how helpful that is. I mean, I guess it got you to rest more, maybe.
Yeah. I didn't mind it though, because I knew to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But so I started losing my mucus plug on Sunday, and then on Monday, my due date, I started having some back pain and what felt like contractions. Kind of started midday. I wasn't working. I was just at home. I was like doing the miles circuit every day, trying to rest and get the house in a good place and do my last little baby prep chores. So the contractions kind of ramped up through the evening, and I was texting my doula and saying, hey, I think like we might be going somewhere. And she's like, all right, I'm getting ready. And I, went to bed early because I thought that maybe I'd go into labor that night, and then like woke up on Tuesday and I was like, well, guess that wasn't it. And then the same exact thing happened on Tuesday and Wednesday, where like midday I would start getting some back pain contractions, especially like after I would do the mile circuit. Then the contractions would start and then they would ramp up through the evening. I'd go to bed and be like ready to go. Thought that I might be woken up by labor, and then would wake up the next morning and be like, okay, well, guess it wasn't last night. So that was kind of frustrating, starting to be in the prodromal labor category. But I knew that eventually this baby would come. And my doula was great and kept saying, everything your body is doing now is preparing and is going to make it easier later. And it's all work your body is doing. So my husband's still working. So I'm just like puttering around the house, trying to do all of the different positioning and everything. So then Wednesday night, I had sort of mild to medium intensity contractions through the night. I could still sleep and still was kind of like able to rest through the day. And then Thursday morning, they had kind of petered out again. But then midday, they got a little more intense. So I was 40 plus 4 at this point. And I feel very fortunate that no one had even mentioned, I think we might have had some conversation about like at some point we might talk about induction, but there was no pressure for induction at all. We were kind of just like, it seems like things are maybe moving in the right direction. We'll see how it goes in the next week and then we can have a conversation. So Thursday, and I was having sort of a similar pattern where midday the contractions were starting and getting more intense, but pretty quickly it became clear that this was more the real deal. So around 1:45, I called my husband in. He works from home, so we were both in the same place. And I was like, I think you need to stop working now. I think I need your assistance here. So he helped me with some positioning and kind of helped me with managing the contractions. By 3 p.m., the contractions were around 3 to 4 minutes apart. And they had told us, the midwives had told us that we should call them if they were open to, and I thought that I was in labor, that we should go in and get seen rather than having to go to the hospital and potentially get sent home. So we called the midwife's office, but there weren't any midwives in the office that day. So they told us just to keep laboring at home if we felt good with that, which I was managing the contractions pretty well and feeling pretty good still. So we stayed at home. We were, checking in with our doula. We FaceTimed our doula at around 5:15, and I remember saying to her, up until now, it's been fun. So that was the moment where I was like, okay, it's getting more intense now. Like, this has been fun. It's like real labor. I'm excited. And now it's like, oh, this is happening. Okay, I better get down to business here. And so we were also trying to manage this balance of not wanting to go into the hospital too early because it's easier to have fewer interventions to be comfortable laboring at home. But also when my mom was in labor with me, I'm the oldest and she has a really high pain tolerance. And when she was like talking on the phone with the midwives when she was in labor, they told her not to come in. And eventually she was like, okay, I just need to go in. And by the time they got to the hospital, she was in transition and like ready to push as soon as they got there. And I was almost born in the parking garage. So I was not trying to recreate that situation. My preference was really to park with my husband and be able to walk in together. And so we were trying to be able to like find that right balance of not going in too early, but not leaving it so late that I was going through transition in the car. And we ended up doing a great job with that. So I got in the bath. We were still at home. Our doula was like, yeah, it sounds like you're, on the right track here, but if you're still managing okay at home, let's keep doing that. Try the bath. So I got in the bath. I was relaxing. I had some calming music going. Steve packed the car. Then he tried to turn the car on just to make sure, and the battery was dead. So he moved all the stuff into the other car and came and told me that he had done that. And I was like, no. You need to jump the car and move the stuff back into the originally planned vehicle that has room for all of the belongings. So he did. Might have thought that I was a crazy pregnant lady, but he did as I asked.
Yeah, smart.
came back and he's like, okay, the car has jumped. It started. I'm just leaving it running. All the stuff is in the car that we planned on. So around 7:00, I got out of the bath. I got in bed. I did some positioning in bed, had some calm music going. I think like Steve came back from moving all of our stuff. And he was like, wow, it's really chill in here. And I was like, that's nice. This is intense. Around 7:30, it got harder to manage. We called the hospital to talk to the on-call midwife and talk to them about coming in. And then I think something got crossed in translation and no one called us back. So we called again at 8:00 or something like that. And at that point we were like, we don't really care what you say. We're coming. It's intense and we're coming to the hospital. You can tell us to turn around if you need to when we get there, but we're going to come get checked out. So all of the things were already in the car. So I don't know what we were doing in the interim, probably just managing contractions and putting on my shoes. But we got to the hospital around 9:00. There was a little bit of confusion about the parking and where we were supposed to go and how we got into the hospital from the parking garage, which probably should have figured that out in advance, but lessons learned for next time. Got up to triage and got checked, and I was 6 centimeters dilated, which was pretty perfect, I thought, for managing that balance. No one was getting birthed in a parking garage, and also no one was getting sent home. So our little one, we were calling the baby B for baby Eppall. So B was ROT or ROA, which I can't remember what those stand for right now. But our doula was like, those are good things. So great. So we called in our doula. We told her that we were at the hospital and staying and she should come. So we got to our room. We were given, I think I requested, and they gave us a room with a pretty deep bath, not a birthing tub, but a pretty sizable bathtub. So I got back in the bath. I found that pretty helpful and comfortable, and stayed in the bath for about an hour till about 10:30. And then from there, everything kind of was in hour chunks. I would find something that worked for me for about an hour, and then I would need to switch. So the bath helped for about an hour. And then at some point, towards the end of that hour, I was like, all right, I got to do something different here. So I got out of the bath and moved to the birth ball, and the midwife came in and started giving me counter pressure. And I just remember being like, oh, this is what counter pressure is supposed to do. Because I think Steve had been trying and it had been helping, but the midwife, Megan, was just the counter pressure queen.
Yeah. I remember feeling that difference too, between my husband and the woman who's done it a million times.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's oh, this really helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sometime around then, our doula arrived and took over the counter pressure, which was also good, but not quite as good as Megan's. After about an hour or so, that intervention stopped working quite as well. And I knew that I was trying to sort of use all the tools in my toolbox. And if I could avoid an epidural, I wanted to. I wasn't completely opposed to it. And I was just listening to a Birth Hour episode where someone was talking about the scale of how one feels about an epidural. From I absolutely will never get one to I really want one right away. And we looked at that with our doula, and I was kind of somewhere in between, I prefer not to, but if I need it, then I'm open to it. But so I wanted to, try to avoid it. So this hospital offers nitrous. So I decided I wanted to try that, which I was a little nervous about because I don't like feeling sort of out of control or out of my head. And it took a little while for me to get used to it. My doula kind of coached me on how to hold the mask to my face and then take it away when the contraction ended. And it took me a little while to kind of get the hang of it, but it ended up working for me pretty well. And I don't remember a whole lot about the sensation. I just remember thinking, oh, this is actually working. This is helping. And I remember at some point my doula saying to the nurse, oh, she's getting grunty. And I was like, oh, am I? I have no idea. I can't hear anything. There were apparently multiple nurses in the room. I have no recollection. I only thought there was one nurse. I was definitely like in the labor zone. I did not know what was going on around me, but I was also like managing it pretty well. And the contractions were getting more and more intense, closer together. And there was one contraction, I think there was like one and then another right on top of it that were super intense. And I felt really, really nauseous and ended up vomiting right after. And right around then, my water broke. I like felt this sort of gush and said to my doula, I think my water just broke. And she's like, oh, really? I was like, yeah. And she's like, oh, yep. She looked and she's like, yep. They tested it and it was indeed my water. And they're like, yep, that's your water. It had meconium in it. So they told me that they wanted to make sure that the pediatrician was there when the baby was born, just to make sure that everything was okay. So I used nitrous for about an hour and things were pretty intense at that point. And I was kind of like at my max of what I could manage with the nitrous. I asked, I don't know, whoever was in the room at that point, if I was like, I want to get checked. And if I'm not at 10 centimeters, if I'm not ready to push, I think I want an epidural. Like this is super intense. And my midwife was like, okay, well, let's see where we are. And let's, like, I know that's not what you originally wanted. So let's just like check in and see where we're at and see what you decide to do. And the midwife came in and checked me. And indeed, I was 10 centimeters. I was ready to push. So I knew that like all of the labor resources that I had read and, talking to our doula in advance, I knew that pushing lying down on the bed was typically like not the most effective or like best for preventing tearing and all of those kinds of things. And so I wanted to try other positions first. So I started like facing towards the bed and holding onto the back of the bed and pushing that way. And it was not very effective. And the midwife mentioned that when she was checking me that I had been pushing and it was effective. I don't think I even knew I was pushing at that point. It's like one of those kind of instinct things, I guess. So the midwife suggested trying to push on my back, which my doula was like, I don't know if that's the best idea, but we could try it. And I was like, you know what? Let's just try it. We don't have to do anything we don't want to do. We can try it for one push and see how we do. And it was a lot more effective. So it ended up being a position that really worked for me. And a nurse or somebody brought in a mirror so I could see my progress. And so I could see like, a little bit of head and a little bit more and a little bit more, which was really kind of motivating to be able to see actual progress. And I remember being like, I can't see anything. Where are my glasses? Somebody had to find me my glasses, which I had taken off when I was using the nitrous, I think. So I pushed for about an hour. Everything in the hospital was kind of on hour increments. And right around 1:30, there was one contraction where the baby's head came partway out. And I was like, well, if it's partway out, it's coming all the way out. And I just pushed again without another contraction. And Emery was born. It was beautiful. And I remember as I was pushing too, because I didn't have an epidural, I could like feel what my body was telling me to do. And one of the nurses was kind of trying to coach me through pushing. And I didn't have the mental bandwidth to say anything, but in my brain, I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. You can't feel this. I know what I'm doing. And I just totally ignored her.
I can relate to that too, as well as the like, okay, like I think my midwife was like, slow down now, like as the baby was crowning. And I was like, I've been pushing forever. I'm not slowing down. And I just kept pushing.
Yeah.
Which might not have been the best decision, but you just do what you do in the moment.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know you have some stuff to share about recovery and immediate postpartum, especially. So let's get into that.
Yeah. So after Emery was born, the midwife put her on my chest and she like immediately crawled over and tried to latch. We did delayed cord cutting. So, let that kind of do its thing. And after a few minutes, my husband cut the cord, which he wasn't sure if he wanted to do. He gets a little bit squeamish about medical things, but he decided he wanted to. And he was really glad that he got the opportunity to do that. we didn't know the sex of our baby in advance. And we picked one gender neutral name that was going to be the baby's name regardless. Steve and I got to announce Emery's name and sex. And I ended up with a 2nd-degree internal tear. She kind of like got stuck on the way out a little bit. And then once she was moving, she was moving. So I remember I was like getting stitched up while I was trying to learn how to nurse Emery. And that was a little bit challenging, painful. And then the nurses were doing the fundal massage. And that was like, I found the fundal massage quite uncomfortable. And I remember kind of like complaining about it, which in retrospect, I kind of wish I hadn't. But the nurses, I'm sure, have lots of people complaining, and they do their fundal massages anyway to do what they need to do. So about 2 or 3 hours after delivery, I just been like in the bed nursing and snuggling Emery the whole time. I think like Steve took her over to the bassinet to get her initial tests done at some point, and then, brought her back. So a couple of hours after delivery, the nurses were like, okay, you need to go to the bathroom before we can send you to recovery. And I was like, okay, I don't really have to go to the bathroom. They're like, no, but you need to. Like, it's one of the requirements. I was like, all right, fine. So I stood up to go to the bathroom, and like sitting on the toilet, I felt kind of dizzy. And I remember the nurse pulled the cord to call for help. And I was like, oh, that seems like kind of an overreaction. Like, I'm just a little dizzy. I think I'm okay. Probably just dehydrated. And this is something that I do pre-children. I have historically done long distance biking and running events. And so like sometimes I get dehydrated and feel a little dizzy, and it kind of felt similar to that. So I thought that that's what it was, that I was kind of dehydrated. So the nurse helped me get back to the bed. I started feeling a little bit nauseous. I got an IV put in for rehydration. The midwife came back in and she did a fundal massage and found that significant clots were coming out. And then as I was lying in the bed, I kept having back pain that felt like the kind of pain that I was having when I was having contractions. And it turned out that that was happening as my uterus was filling up with blood, and then the fundal massage would get it out and I would be like not in pain anymore. And then my back would start to hurt again, and then the midwife would do the fundal massage and the blood would come out. So it became clear that this was kind of a significant bleeding event. And I remember the midwife used some acronym that, and I was like, oh, what does that mean? And she was like, it's the massive transfusion protocol. And I was like, oh, okay, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
So they got blood from the blood bank, which they at that point were saying was sort of just in case. And they gave me some additional meds to try to stop the bleeding, which didn't work. And I remember saying to my midwife, like, this is the kind of thing that if I were in a hospital, like if I didn't have access to good medical care, I would die from this. And she was basically like, probably. But luckily I was in a hospital where I was getting good medical care. So I feel really fortunate that the hospital I delivered at, I was able to work with the midwives for the birth and have a low intervention birth. And then as soon as I needed them, like they called the MD team in, and there was an MD in my room in 30 seconds. So the MD came in, discussed the best course of action. They're kind of doing all of these other things simultaneously. They're administering the medications through IV. They placed another IV to transfuse blood. They ended up giving me 3 units of blood. And they were planning on doing a procedure. And then as they were kind of like making this plan, I was continuing to lose blood fairly quickly. And so they decided that it would be best to put me under general anesthesia in order to do this procedure, so that if I needed further intervention, I was already kind of ready for it. So there were some sort of scary moments where they were, the doctor was like, so we're going to do this procedure where we place it's called a Bakary balloon. It's basically like putting pressure on the uterus. So, like if your arm is bleeding and you like put your hand on your arm and put pressure on it to stop the bleeding, it's the same idea, just in the uterus. So, she told me what they were going to do. They were going to place this balloon, put pressure on the uterus to try to stop the bleeding. And she was like, if that doesn't work, then we would move to a hysterectomy for life-saving purposes. And that was scary and not what I was hoping for, obviously.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But, I said, like, hopefully you won't have to do that. But obviously, if you need to do a hysterectomy to save my life, please do so. So they brought me, it was like right next door into the operating room. I think at this point, Emery was taken to the nursery so that she could get cared for because Steve was focusing on like me and his own mental health needs. And I was going to be under general anesthesia. So Emery needed care. So she went to the nursery. I went to the operating room and don't remember being under general anesthesia, obviously, but woke up back in the room and found out that the Bakri balloon had been placed and was successful and had pretty quickly stopped the bleeding. So I did not need a hysterectomy, did not undergo major surgery, which I'm grateful for. I did lose approximately 3 liters of blood, which was quite significant. So it was pretty scary in the moment. And I didn't feel prepared for that possibility, really. Like I knew that postpartum hemorrhages happened, but I didn't quite know they happened like that.
Yeah, that's like extreme scenario for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely have done a lot of processing with my therapist and with friends and family about what happened. And, obviously we eventually decided that we wanted to have a second child. And in that process, we went through a lot of, we talked to multiple doctors and midwives about what we would do differently this time around to try to prevent this from happening. And done some testing and all of that. So
that's good. Yeah. I feel like once it's happened once, they're like super vigilant about doing preventative things as well.
Yeah, definitely. And apparently there's a new device that they use. It's called the Jada.
Okay.
That apparently like you don't have to be under general anesthesia to get it placed, and it's very, very effective.
Okay.
So they said they would have it ready to go for me.
Okay.
Should I need it this time.
All right. Well, I'm glad everything was okay, but yeah, that's definitely a lot to process.
Yeah.
Especially after like a pretty standard delivery.
Right.
Yeah.
It was like basically textbook.
Right. Yeah.
Up until that point. And then it was also surprising because it was delayed. I feel like I hear about hemorrhages like right then.
With the placenta. Yeah.
Right. But it was a couple of hours later. So their best guess, they said, is that because I had prodromal labor, and so there was like a long early labor and then active labor was quick, that my uterus was just like, what are you doing? And didn't remember how to contract down, basically.
Yeah.
Like the muscles got too tired or something.
Right. Well, okay. So then I know you wanted to share a little bit about like longer term postpartum and getting us to where we are today.
Yeah. So early postpartum, I, was just like resting and recovering initially. One plus side of the whole situation was that the medications they gave me diarrhea, which doesn't sound like a plus, but I know a lot of people get really, really nervous about their first postpartum poop. And I didn't have like an actual postpartum poop other than the diarrhea until like 3 days later. So that was fine. So that was a plus. And also everything was cleared out of my uterus. Like all the blood was gone. So I had pretty minimal postpartum bleeding as well.
Yeah.
So, I guess there's silver linings.
Hey, yeah, take what you can get for sure.
So I definitely had some anxiety postpartum, which I feel like I managed okay and, had resources prepared and work with a therapist anyway. But in retrospect, there are some things that I'm like, wow, I wanted to stare at my baby all day, but also like I could have taken a nap. There were people ready to like hang out with the baby and I could take a nap. So, in retrospect, there maybe was a little bit more anxiety than I was giving myself credit for. I also had a rash that I think was PUPS. No one quite diagnosed it for me, but that was about a week postpartum. So I was just like really itchy all over my like belly and chest, and then it spread to my legs, and it resolved relatively quickly.
That's good.
But yeah, I felt like that was hard to get treatment for. I tried to go to the midwives and went to urgent care, and it wasn't urgent enough for anybody to pay attention to, I guess.
Did you end up getting something?
Yeah, I got some oatmeal bath stuff.
Oh, great.
Yeah, right. Great. And they did give me some prescription steroid cream, but I was a little nervous because we were I was breastfeeding and I didn't want the baby to get the steroid cream. And I didn't get great instruction about how to use this cream in a way that was safe for the baby. So I ended up not really using it much, which probably there was a better way to do that, which also probably involves more nursing clothes, which I didn't really have at that point.
So it just kind of went away eventually?
Yeah, it went away. I must have been within a week or two.
Okay.
I feel like I remember it being very intensely itchy for a little bit. And then it kind of, I don't remember it after that. So it must have all in the newborn fog.
Yeah. All right. Well, do you want to share any resources?
Yeah. So one that I would love to share is lactation consultants. So we had an IBCLC who came to do a home visit early on. If you're in the Boston North Shore area, her name is Kira Kim. She's wonderful. So that was really, really helpful. We ended up using a nipple shield for a while. And she came back around 2 to 3 months to help us wean off the nipple shield. She recommended OT, which really helped. We did get off the nipple shield. Yeah. So if you have access to an IBCLC, they are magic. And our doula suggested that we schedule with her in advance, which was a great decision because, immediately postpartum, we did not have the bandwidth to be scheduling anything.
Yes.
I also, for anyone who is breastfeeding or planning to breastfeed, kellymom.com has a lot of really great resources. And then the other thing that I learned about a couple of months in I found super helpful is the Infant Risk Call Center. So they're a call center that focuses on providing information about medication that's to let parents know what's safe or not safe to take while they're pregnant or breastfeeding. Because a lot of providers, they'll just tell you not to take something because they don't know. And there's actually medications, a lot of medications are actually totally safe to take while you're breastfeeding, but providers don't really know.
Yeah.
So the Infant Risk Call Center, they have a website and then they also have a phone number that you can call during their business hours. There's a trained nurse, I think, who responds to every single person and will tell you the specifics about your baby's age and the amount that they're taking in and all of that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I knew about LactMed is one, and then Kelly Mom has a lot of information on that as well. But being able to actually talk to a person is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I think they use the same system as LactMed.
Okay.
But it's, you can actually talk through your concerns and it's very specific. They'll ask you the age of your baby or how far along you are in pregnancy, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Cool.
So, yeah.
All right. And then where can people reach out to connect with you?
You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Rebecca.Eppall or Rebecca Eppall on Facebook. I think they're both private, but you can send me a message and I will get back to you.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to talk to Ryan, co-founder of Needed, about their recent IRB study results and all of the great products from Needed. Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast to chat with me about Needed again.
Brand, I'm so excited to be back.
Awesome. Well, before we get into all of the new things happening over at Needed, can you just share with my listeners a little bit about who you are and your role at Needed?
Absolutely. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of Needed.
All right. So I recommend Needed to my listeners, my followers on Instagram all the time. I've been using the products for over a year now. And I just really love that with your perinatal products, you really go beyond the bare minimum. And it's just really important, especially for the people in my audience, because we know that during the stages of life where you're growing babies and feeding babies are especially nutritionally demanding. So I love that you guys are addressing these nutrient deficiencies and talking about now that not all prenatal vitamins are created equally. And on that note, your team just released the results of an IRB study highlighting these differences between standard prenatal vitamins versus Needed. Can you just talk a little bit more about this?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited. This has been a baby of mine for a while.
Yeah.
But basically, there is overwhelming evidence that proper nutrient levels can improve fertility, birth outcomes, and the trajectory of life for both mother and baby thereafter. Yet, as we all know, despite our little kind of communities, nutrition has not been front and center in the perinatal standard of care. And most prenatals on the market provide bare minimum nutrition support. We're designing and conducting studies to add to the clinical literature to unequivocally prove that women deserve more support, resources, and radically better nutritional care. We really just fundamentally think the evidence just cannot be ignored anymore, as the lack of nutritional support is really failing women and children. So our goal for this study specifically was to take a more comprehensive look at nutritional status in pregnancy. The study compared nutritional characteristics between women taking the needed prenatal multi and a standard prenatal vitamin.
Okay.
We collected survey data and analyzed nutrient biomarkers, so nutrient levels actually in the blood themselves, in a diverse group of 235 adult pregnant women across 7 U.S. states. And what's really exciting, and what you're hinting towards, is that the results actually revealed quite striking insights into how maternal nutrition status differs by the type of prenatal vitamin a woman is taking during pregnancy. Specifically, we found that women taking the needed prenatal multi had higher blood levels of key nutrients for pregnancy, including vitamin D, B6, selenium, and zinc, among a number of others. When we compared prenatal subgroups, we found that only the group of women taking the needed multi had sufficient blood levels of vitamin D and vitamin B6 compared to the group taking the standard prenatal. And nutrients like vitamin D and B6 play key roles in pregnancy in supporting both maternal and baby health outcomes. So it's really exciting. And it's also important to reiterate that our study was diverse and the prenatal groups were comparable on several key factors outside of their prenatal vitamins. This is really important for the rigor of the study. So for example, 1/3 of the women in each group identified as a race ethnicity other than white, and women in both groups were in similar stages of their pregnancy.
Okay, and what does the IRB part mean?
The IRB is the Institutional Review Board, and they're basically a committee that reviews clinical research involving human subjects to ensure that certain ethical standards are met.
Okay, it's super important when studying pregnant women.
Super important when studying pregnant women, and in terms of showing proper kind of rigor and study design went into the methodology of how we conducted the research as well.
Right. So one thing that I thought was interesting is that a lot of this past studies weren't even done on pregnant women or even women. Oftentimes it was like based on white men as far as vitamin levels and things like that. So as you mentioned, these are really striking results. And what does this really mean for women in the trying to conceive or pregnancy or postpartum season of life? Like, what should we be taking away from this data?
You're right that sort of there is a lot of missing gaps in the research, though we also have found that there is a lot of really good research emphasizing the need for better nutrition at this stage of life. But overall, we see this study as adding to the growing body of evidence showing that, one, meeting nutritional needs through diet alone is very challenging in modern context. So supplementation is needed. Two, that most pregnant women in the U.S. fail to meet dietary recommendations for certain key nutrients that are very important for pregnancy, like vitamin D. And third, I think increased evidence that standard prenatals are really falling short in closing the gap between nutritional needs and dietary intake. And overall, we hope this study leads to more clinicians and moms advocating for the nutrition that is needed for a healthy pregnancy.
Yeah, and I've been sharing about this with my followers on Instagram from some of the data you guys are talking about. And one thing I thought was really interesting was the statistic about how few care providers are discussing nutrition with pregnant and postpartum women at all.
Yeah, that is absolutely striking. We found that nearly 80% of women reported receiving little to no nutritional advice from their OBGYN during their pregnancy care.
Yeah, and this is something that comes up on the podcast a lot because I feel like people really notice a difference when they have midwifery care versus OBGYNs, because nutrition is something that's talked about in these much longer prenatal appointments and things like that. So yeah, it's a big part of feeling good throughout pregnancy. And I know that one thing that Needed really focuses on as well is that it's not just during pregnancy, but also postpartum. So can you talk a little bit about that as well?
We equate it in a lot of ways to nutritional depletion, and that a lot of the importance for this life stage is in avoiding depletion. So meaning when your body lacks the essential vitamins, minerals, or other nutrients that are really needed for optimal function. And depletion is not something that occurs only through pregnancy, but women are more vulnerable in critical life stages such as pregnancy and breastfeeding. So that postpartum stage that you mentioned right there. And a lot of the problem is that women go into pregnancy already depleted and then increase their depletion in growing baby, so end up in a pretty tough spot postpartum. Mm-hmm. There are many contributors to this depletion, from nutrient deficient soil and stress. And then the signs of depletion like brittle nails, fatigue, headaches, mood changes, thinning hair, constipation, dry skin, all sound pretty familiar to us, right? Mm-hmm. And really research suggests that up to 95% of women experience nutritional depletion even when they are on a prenatal vitamin.
Oh my gosh.
Depletion is, I think, a much bigger problem than we actually, have historically given it credit. And a lot of us, women just assume we have to feel these things, these signs of depletion, just as part of our, that's just the status quo. That's how it's supposed to be. And I think a lot of our sort of emphasis is showing that no, radically better is possible. There are ways to better support ourselves through nutrition to minimize those signs of depletion.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to someone recording their birth story, and they were saying how, they were super focused on their nutrition during pregnancy, and then it kind of fell to the wayside postpartum. And it's like especially if you're breastfeeding, it's taking a lot of energy and nutrients, and then you're also sleep deprived because you have a new baby. So the depletion, I think, like you mentioned, is just something we really need to focus on beyond pregnancy.
Yeah, and most care providers aren't really reminding folks. They think of it as like a prenatal, not a perinatal.
Right.
There are some postnatals that exist, but I think the use of them in that breastfeeding life stage that is actually more nutritionally intensive than pregnancy is a non-supported part of this life stage. And, where we see so many women really talking about that postpartum period being the most difficult. And I think being able to advocate and raise awareness to better support and how do we care for mom, not just care for baby during that stage is very important.
Yes, I'm just nodding along to everything over here. So are there any other supplements that women should consider outside of a prenatal to help fight depletion?
Absolutely. So most prenatals and aren't included are vitamin and mineral blends. And there are many other nutrients that are supportive of combating nutrition. Unfortunately, we just don't think that there's a single product that can fully get you over the hill on depletion lack. So it needed what we are really focused on rather than just a single product, though we do hero our prenatal multi a lot, but really an emphasis on a system of products is most supportive. And for example, we do offer an omega-3 DHA EPA add-on. So DHA omega is often something that you probably do hear as part of taking that alongside your prenatal. And DHA and EPA are very supportive of a healthy pregnancy. Sometimes they are combined with a prenatal multi, but we often see that can lead to kind of lack of nutrient integrity or too low of doses. So we do think it is important to offer it as a separate product for that reason, but do advocate for that being added on to your system of products. And then there's a whole host of other products depending on needs. I personally really love our sleep support, as lack of sleep is a big contributor to depletion. And I also really love our breastfeeding safe cognitive support product. It's a product that really helps me sort of feel like me and try to do it all by being a working mom while still, breastfeeding and chasing after my kids. Being able to focus when I need to focus is a critical part of that.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of that one as well. So you guys offer several bundles and things like that with these add-ons. Where's the best place for people to start if they're trying to decide what's right for them?
Our website does help to guide you by sort of life stage or need, which is thisisneeded.com, or we're at Needed on Instagram. And we actually have a team of trained nutritionists and doulas as part of our customer support team. So they're eager and ready to help if you do want to sort of DM us or email us if you kind of get stuck on the website your own. So that's a great place to start. And then I'd also really recommend folks to go to thisisneeded.com/thrive to learn more about the prenatal study and the rigor that went into it, and a lot more results beyond what we're able to share today.
Yes, it's so fascinating. And I'm the same way. Like I can't squeeze it all in to share on Instagram either. And so I'm like, please go check it out, because it really is amazing what you guys were able to find out from this study. And I love that people are available in the DMs to help guide, because I feel like it can be really overwhelming when choosing your prenatal. And starting with the main prenatal is obviously a great choice, but I know lots of people want to take advantage of these bundles too. So that's great to know that it's available to DM or email.
Yeah, I think we're here to help, and it's really a passion of a lot of members of the team to do so. So we're excited to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for chatting with me about all of this. It's always great to hear what you guys are up to, and I'm always happy to share with my listeners about Needed.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much again to Rebecca for sharing her story with us, and to Needed for sponsoring this episode. Remember to use the coupon code BIRTHHOUR to get the discount at thisisneeded.com. I will link to that as well as all of Rebecca's resources on her show notes page, which you can find at thebirthhour.com by just searching for her name in the search bar. And I'll also list those coupon codes and everything in the podcast apps where you're listening to this episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.